we need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Manuel, I wanted to start with you because a lot of our audience won't be aware of this. What's the context of the circular economy in Latin America now? How pervasive is the idea?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation first. Well, three things come to mind. The first one has to do with climate change. I mean, there is a whole discourse about how this region is not contributing that much to climate change, but will be affected by climate change ultimately. This will be the focus of the COP25 in Chile. Therefore, the issue of climate change is picking up very strongly in the region. And we actually see the circular economy as an approach that can support the combat of climate change. The second aspect that comes to mind as well is we're dealing with a resource-rich region. A region that basically wants to be more efficient in terms of managing resources, and certainly the circular economy provides fantastic framework by which countries can actually generate income out of the resources that they have in a more efficient manner. And the last point is possibly to UNIDO, one of the most important ones, which is what are the next sources of income for the region in the forthcoming years? I mean, normally we're dealing with countries that have been dependent on exporting primary goods and focusing very much on extracting industries. And normally the recipe has been for these countries to actually move away from these sectors towards manufacturing, and within manufacturing, these technology-intensive sectors. Now, with the circular economy, the whole thing changes now dramatically, because what we actually see is the potential of adding value in existing industries where countries have comparative advantage, be it, for instance, agriculture or mining. And this changes radically the way we understand the industrialization process of countries. So it's not so much about changing and moving away from sectors where the country has a comparative advantage, but it's really building the capabilities in existing sectors through circular economy, and of course by the advent of Industry 4.0. These are the two mega trends that we see, and they are related by all means, and these are the two mega trends that we believe will play a major role in Latin America's future development. Now, this has led to a few initiatives in the region. One of them is the production of circular economy roadmaps, very much like in Europe. These roadmaps are in a very incipient state, but what is important is that countries and policymakers are actually engaging with the private sector to develop these roadmaps. This is happening in Chile, it's happening here in Uruguay, it's happening in Colombia as well, some other countries in the region. This has been developed together with a new body of norms and regulations, very much the sort of measures that the European Union has put forward in the Closing the Loop package in 2015. The countries are moving towards that. At the same time, we have programs in which we're actually testing the validity of circular business models. The circular economy is not a panacea, and we've realized that there are many obstacles for it as well. And this is something that we want to talk about. And what we've also seen is the private sector getting engaged. I think the private sector here feels that if the circular economy is such an important thing, there should be some income that they can actually generate. So this idea of bringing together a business activity with an environmental focus is something that is attracting the private sector. So this is the context in which we are in Latin America.
So yes, I mean, with those three things in mind, you mentioned the fact that it's in some ways a response to climate change, that there's a resource opportunity, there's also a sort of development or growth opportunity, or a new kind of growth opportunity. Paula, your role specifically, you've worked on something, I believe it's called the Circular Economy Opportunities Program. I guess that's the English translation in Uruguay, which is one of the national level initiatives that I guess Manuel was alluding to. What is that and what does it do?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. We are very pleased to be able to share the work that we are doing from the agency regarding promoting the circular economy in Uruguay. So we come up with this program that it's called Circular Opportunities. And what we're trying to do with this program is actually trying to engage the private sector in this process of transitioning toward the circular economy. And the program is based on three main components. And the first one is understanding that we need to generate knowledge and put that knowledge in service of the private sector. I mean, we need to engage the private sector by showing successful experiences and showing mainly what opportunities are related, what opportunities they can actually take advantage of regarding making their business model more circular. And the thing is, it's we can show them a lot of successful experiences, but we also need to make this experience for them more profitable, because at first there are some risk involved here. I mean, there are a lot of innovation, there are a lot of new things that for firms and for entrepreneurs, sometimes it's difficult to take the risk that involves trying to a new way of doing their business. They are very used to do it some way that it worked for them. So how do we support them to share that risk? So we are trying to address the funding gap that represent change in the model towards a more circular business model in different activities and in different sectors. So we have these two components. On one side, generating knowledge and trying to help them identify opportunities and trying to make they identify and actually size these opportunities, and on the other hand, trying to provide financial support for them to implement circular models and making their own models, business model more circular, related new firms, and also in traditional firms that have been working for a long time but need to start thinking in a circular way so they can change some parts of their business model. So that's the focus of the program.
So we've got the knowledge sharing, we've got the funding. I with the finance side of that equation, I mean, I'm not a finance expert, self-confessed, not even my own finances actually, but one thing I do know is that finance is normally dependent on historical data, evidence that this has worked in the past, and therefore you can make investment decisions based on that. So I guess, Paula, a question for you is, in some way you or your organisation must have been personally convinced by the circular economy as an idea to actually be willing to bridge that funding gap. What about it compelled either yourself or your organisation to make that sort of jump, as it were?
Well, first of all, we are a national development agency, so our core is to promote development, and so we need to understand that being a small country, we only can think of a sustainable development based on the efficient use of our natural resources. We are an economy based on agricultural and agricultural industry. So we need to start thinking in a more sustainable way of using our resources in order to produce, in order to generate economic growth, in order to generate development. So this is out of the question. We need to think of how we actually attain a path of sustainable development. And then circular economy, it's like a great answer to that, because on one hand, it's based on the efficiency of the use of resources, and on the other hand, it also has the profitability point, a part of the equation. So this is the way that we understand we can convince the private sector of getting along with this transition. I mean, we are not asking to make an effort of being environmentally friendly based on their own effort. We are trying to show them that you can be profitable, but also in a sustainable way. You can make your business and growth and generate employment, but also trying to be more efficient in the use of natural resources, in the generation of waste, and in the context of circular economy, these both parts actually blend together in a perfect mix. So
So it's a challenge for many businesses to operate in today's economy in a circular fashion when everything has been optimized for take, make, waste. What does that work involve you doing? Is that convincing policymakers of making particular shifts? And if so, what are those shifts? Or how hard is it to convince policymakers in Latin America to do something like that?
Yeah, well, it really has to do with legislation. When I talk about rules of the game, I really mean the regulatory framework that countries need to put forward to make all these business models conducive. Yeah. So, for instance, extended producer responsibility without having one, it is impossible to actually push businesses to actually take care of their own waste if you don't have a waste management law. Exactly the same. So there are fundamental laws and regulations that need to be in place so that to create the incentives and the disincentives to move in the right direction. I think what we've come to realize is that, by putting all these regulations, the business community actually feels that we're taxing them. It's like an environmental tax to move toward the circular economy. And in some instances, you would actually say, yes, well, there's some disincentives through taxing, but at the same time, you have to give the carrot side. It's not just the stick, but the carrot side. And the carrot is the incentives that you have by producing and implementing, for instance, an eco RRD design scheme by which firms can actually get part of the resources if they get engaged in innovative and sustainable R&D activities. So there has to be at the same time incentives and disincentives to accomplish this. So I think there's a major role by the public sector, by the government, and that's what I mean when I mention that the rules of the game needs to be very clearly spelled out.
We talked a lot about how important collaboration is between policy, finance, businesses. In fact, in many ways, you both said that that a business can't do this on their own with the rules of the game have changed. How much are those, thinking about the difference between Latin American and the European context, for example, how much of those are nation specific? Like, how valuable is collaboration regionally in enabling the circular economy? Is that a factor, or is it actually really possible for a country like Uruguay to push forward with a circular economy agenda, regardless of whether Argentina or Chile or any other country is doing similar work?
Well, I think all these initiatives spread out pretty quickly. Once a country goes for it, then other countries can actually imitate and copy and feel comfortable with adopting the same kind of principles. We do have, in fact, a few initiatives where we're trying to link up the different roadmaps in countries and trying to learn from each other. In fact, in Chile, Corfo launched a very similar program to Andes program. So, and there are lessons being learned, and we're hoping that in COP25 we'll put the two teams to work together and understand, what worked, what didn't work, what lessons are learned. So I think there are prospects for South-South cooperation in terms of circular economy. But I think at this stage, to be honest, I think it's more, trial and error and very much, trying to learn about what is happening in other parts of the world and seeing whether those policies are replicable here. I mean, I think even in Europe, we still need to see whether all these circular economy discourse keeps going for some time, and whether all the promises made that it will generate all these millions of jobs and all these income actually materializes in practice. So, we are dealing with countries that are pretty advanced in the developing world, and therefore, they're keeping very close to what's happening in richer countries. But very much they do have their own agendas, and they go alone.
But something that I think it's important regarding this about collaboration, regional collaboration, I think is, although we don't have this supranational institution that actually helps to get this kind of agreement or collaboration among countries, we all understand that we need the other countries, but all economies in Latin America are small economies that depend on the trade and depend on the relationship with other countries. So we need to understand that this needs to be a collaborative approach from all the countries, and not just individual initiatives from different countries trying to complement by chance. We need to start working on that process. Yeah. And of course, it's harder. It's a challenge because we don't have like an authority that actually tell us what to do, how to do it. So it's a process of negotiation and trying to build networks and trying to work together and find out how we can all together promote this circular economy approach from a Latin American perspective.
Sounds like in some ways as well, there's kind of a friendly competitiveness between countries in terms of like a sort of front-running agenda. And I do like your point, Manuel, that it's, when we talk about the emergence of circular economy in Europe, we're not talking about a region or even individual countries that have done it. They're all at different parts of the journey, and actually most of them are at a stage of unveiling strategies and roadmaps as opposed to changing massive parts of their economy. Paula, I wanted to ask you, especially since it seems that Chile are copying what you've done, what's next for the Circular Opportunities Programme?
Okay, so we have been working in this program for the past 2 years. We have seen a very nice evolution of the kind of projects that we can support. Now we are moving towards supporting projects related to services needed to enhance the circular economy in the country. So we are thinking now that we need to scale this with generating funding from the financial sector. I mean, the whole purpose of this program is to give like the initial push, but now we need to make the financial sector understand that this kind of business models, this kind of projects can be financed through commercial banking credit. And we are starting to work on how can we assess this kind of projects from a financial point of view, and trying to work with the banks and the rest of the financial institutions to promote the generation of like green credit lines, and to develop this part of the equation that still haven't made much progress.